Welcome, data-driven postmortems. Yeah, hopefully this is what you're all here for. Break shit, right? Yes, you should all be out there breaking things, because if you're moving fast, you're deploying frequently like we're all supposed to do, things just happen and stuff breaks, whether it's intentional or not. But breaking things is actually good, and doing change is the follow-up to that, right? We don't just break things to break things, unless you happen to be on like the Chaos Monkey team. But the idea is to improve, to actually build in change with what we want to do. That said, who am I other than the crazy person standing in front of you writing shameless plugs on this pad over here? I'm Jason. I'm a technical evangelist at Datadog. I like to say that that's docs and talks. So I write technical documentation. I come to conferences. I talk to people about monitoring. I normally don't do shameless plugs, but that was just me having fun. I do work at Datadog. Datadog is a SaaS-based monitoring company. So we handle all of your time series metrics, infrastructure application. We do tracing, so APM products, and we also do logging now. So that's our newest feature. So you can get all of those in one place, easily switch between them, have everybody seeing the same stuff. To give you an idea of the scale of what we handle, we do trillions of points of data every day. We've gotten fairly massive. We have a lot of customers, a lot of large customers now as well. So when we're building things at that scale, things do inevitably break. That said, if you are someone who likes to break things, if you're someone who likes to fix things, if you're someone who likes to have creative challenges and build tools for other engineers, we are hiring. So jobs.datadoghq.com if you're interested, or come talk to me afterward. But enough of the plug. Let's talk about doing change. Doing change really means that you want to change things, but not just arbitrarily change things, right? You don't want to just be poking around in the dark and trying things and who knows what. The idea of having change is that when you break things, you should have the right data, which is why this is data-driven postmortems. Having good data, though, requires a few things out of your data. So at Datadog, we like to say that there are really 4 good qualities of the metrics you should be gathering. So on the technical side, where should we be gathering that data? And the first of those qualities is that they have to be well understood. And I like to illustrate this by the story of the blind men and the elephant. And the parable goes this way, that there's a bunch of blind men, and they all encounter an elephant. So each of them, being blind, reaches out, and they start feeling around on this elephant. And they're reaching out and feeling different parts. So one of them grabs onto the tail and says, oh, the elephant is like a thin snake. And another one reaches out and touches the side of the elephant and says, the elephant's big and broad, it's like a wall. And so that none of them actually understand what an elephant is like. And unfortunately, when it comes to our monitoring systems, this is what a lot of organizations are doing. You're on a different team, so every team has their own monitoring solution, and they're all looking at different things. And so how do you know within your business application what's going on? Where do you fall within that? How do you actually contribute to your company if it's disparate? If you're all separate pieces, if you're monitoring different things, you don't have the data that you need. So trying to pull all of that into one place is really key when it comes to gathering the data and understanding, particularly as we think about postmortems and going back through and reviewing that data. The second good quality is that they have to be sufficiently granular, the metrics that you're gathering. So if we think about things like the Olympics, so the Winter Olympics just happened. One of my favorite events is the men's speed skating, because I used to be a skater. And so we can look, these are the times for one of the races. This is the 50 meter, so it's the shortest one. But we can see that these are the top 5 guys, and they all finished in 34 seconds. And so we understand innately that for this particular event, we can't measure just on whole seconds, because if we did, well, then everybody here would have won gold, right? They're all 34 seconds. So at this level, we do 100th of a second granularity. And the same thing comes down with your monitoring systems. If we take a look at our systems, 1 second granularity is pretty common. So if I have a CPU spike here, for those in the back that can't see it, it's peaking at a bit over 46% in this case, and it happens at 2:06 and 16 seconds. Fairly understandable. a lot of the systems that people are running these days, especially as we think of public cloud and the offerings, all of the major public cloud providers are on 1-minute granularity. Well, what does that do for us? Not only does that shift the time, so we can see that we lost the idea that this happened 16 seconds after the minute. So if we decide that we're going to go look up in our logs what happened, now we're looking in the wrong place, but it also dropped us down to 36% because it averages those out. The fun thing I like to tell people is if you want 100% uptime, just roll up to like 5 minutes or 10 minutes, right? So for those in the back, because this is lower down, if you roll up to 5 minutes, again, you're shifting that time, but you're averaging it down. So our CPU spike went from 46 to 12%. So again, you get fantastic uptime when you roll things up. The third quality that you need is really that your metrics have to be tagged and filterable. So the idea behind tags is that when we have a metric point, we often think of it as a name of a what is it and a how much, a value, right? So like CPU and percentage, and then there's some sort of time of when this happened. But what we really need these days, especially as we're rolling out across regions, across availability zones, different applications, is a tag of where. Where was this from? It provides that context. So in Datadog, we have tags. If you're using things like Prometheus, they use labels. Most modern monitoring systems should have this. If you don't, you need to consider switching because you won't get that context that you need. What this allows us to do then is to start to treat our monitoring systems like databases in a way, to be able to query against them. What happened on my application for a particular version or for particular deployment of that application or where it is, and you can start to compare things so you get that context. And the fourth quality is that you absolutely need to have long-lived metrics. You need to keep these things around so that you can understand the history of them. Especially as we're going back and doing postmortems, we want to understand how we did before compared to what happened now. I like to illustrate this with this. If I showed you this graph and asked you, what's wrong with this metric? Can you tell me? But if I keep that history, and maybe I apply a little machine learning to it, I can start to actually analyze things. And OK, now it's really clear that I can see that there are these groups of 5, and they correspond to days. And I can have my machine learning point out that, hey, there was an outage on that Tuesday, or something went wrong. So the technical issues, those are pretty simple. Hopefully all of you have good monitoring in place. When it comes down to postmortems, though, the real challenge comes around the human data, and how do we collect that? So I'd like to share how we do things at Datadog. Before I do, though, I also want to point out that if you're in the middle of an incident, don't try to postmortem it. I know a lot of people get excited about, like, we're in something, let's gather all the data. And I like to illustrate this by, if you're a police officer and you show up at the scene of an accident, and there's still, like, cars flying by you and explosions happening, like, you don't just stop and, like, look at the first car that crashed and, like, try to do the investigation. So if we're talking about the human side, who do we collect data from? And I'm going to turn back again to the idea of a police officer or crime scenes. And when we think about analyzing from people, oftentimes we talk to the first responders, the people that are actually on our engineering teams that are remediating issues, because clearly they have their hands in things. They know what went wrong. But we often miss out on other perspectives. And so I'd like you to adopt that idea of you are a crime scene investigator as you're investigating an outage. So who do police talk to? If I'm an investigator, well, I don't stop with that first responder, whether that's a police officer or paramedic. You want to talk to the people that I call identifiers. So those are your witnesses, right? If I'm an investigator, I'm going to talk to the witnesses of a crime and figure out what they saw. I'm not just going to stop there. Obviously, police talk to the victim. So who was the person that actually experienced this issue? The idea here is that you really want to start incorporating your customers. And those can be internal customers if you have a service that interacts with other services. But those could very well be your actual customers, people on the outside that use your retail application or your banking application or whatever you're actually building. Because those people have an interesting perspective, you can understand their pain points when it comes to analyzing your data and figuring out how you should go about remediating issues or preventing those issues in the future. So that's the who. What should we actually be collecting? And the idea here is actually we want to be collecting people's perspectives. Not only what they did, but what they thought when they were actually doing those actions. What information was on hand? We want to know why people are doing what they're doing, more than actually what they're doing. Because if we understand what information people have, we understand the drives that they have. John Allspaw likes to say that nobody comes to work with the intention of blowing up a system. Everybody that's on your team, assuming that they're good apples, which I think we all are, you go to work thinking, I'm going to have an amazing day. I'm going to build an amazing product. I'm going to make a deploy and make things better. So if something goes wrong, you have to understand, or try to understand, what information did they have? Why did they make the decisions that they did? Because that's actually what you want to fix, and not necessarily the actions that they were taking. A good way to think about this and to gather this information is to have people write it down. So a lot of times when we do postmortems, you're sitting around and you're talking to people, and people are telling their story. But this quote from Richard Gwindon is amazing. Writing is nature's way of letting us know how sloppy our thinking is. Because it's really clear when you're talking to somebody, and we all sort of yada, 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 thing happened, right? And when we're talking to people, it's really clear because we're in the same context, we understand where things are going, and that yada, yada, yada is filled in for us by our brains. But if I'm writing it out, I can't really yada, yada, yada when I'm writing. It forces everybody that's writing to actually start to analyze what they're writing and to think about that logically. Another great thing to do as you're having people write is to include pictures. As mentioned, you should all have good monitoring services. We talked about the type of metrics that you need. So you should have dashboards that actually have all of this information. Pictures are worth 1,000 words. It's one thing for me to say, I saw CPU spike at a certain time, and great, you're like, a spike, I kind of know what that looks like. But if I actually show it to you, well, now you get more information. So it's the who, the what, the when. When should you gather this data? Well, as quickly as possible. And I know that's an easy thing to say, but it's actually true. So one of the first researchers for memory was this German researcher by the name of Evangelist. And he actually studied how quickly memory drops off. And it's really this exponential thing that within the first 20 minutes, you've lost like half of what you'll actually remember. And that sort of starts to plateau out at about 2 days. So if you're waiting 2 days to do postmortem, there's really no difference between waiting 2 days and waiting 2 months. So really try to get things in before those first 2 days. A great way to do this is to get project managers involved. Get those project managers to understand there was an incident, block out time to actually do that postmortem. Otherwise, if you're an engineer like me, I don't really care about postmortems all the time. I want to build that next thing. I think a lot of us are driven to build the cool features. So blocking out that time is important. The other thing that recent studies have shown about memory is that along with that drop-off, the susceptibility to false memories rises in an inverse fashion. So that leads to data skew and corruption. Data skew and corruption for human systems, rather than technical, usually involves stress. If it's an ongoing thing, it involves sleep deprivation. If you have a lot of outages, that leads to burnout. So as much as I'd like to say always do your postmortems within a 2-day period and as quickly as possible, be aware that you are dealing with coworkers. We're all humans. We all have issues. So be aware of these. Try not to induce more stress because that'll just corrupt your data even more. The other way to corrupt your data is to introduce blame. The fear of punitive actions. People won't tell you the truth when you're actually dealing with them if they're afraid that they're going to get fired. There's a bunch of other ways to introduce data skew and corruption. Biases are a huge one. Anchoring, putting too much weight on a particular thing. Hindsight bias is one of the worst. If you ever find yourself asking why someone didn't do something or they should have done something else, keep in mind that's in hindsight. So identify what was the information that you were expecting them to have and how you can resolve that in the future. Outcome bias is another one. Our good decisions are not always correlated with good outcomes. And I like to point this out that I love whiskey. I can go out and drink a bunch of whiskey and go driving and not get into an accident. That doesn't make drunk driving a good decision, despite the good outcome. So all that said, I've got 5 minutes left. I'm going to quickly go through how we do postmortems or incident reviews at Datadog. A few notes is that we email these out company-wide. So I get a lot of these in my inbox of postmortems because everybody gets these, because we all want to learn from every single team. So across the organization, including some non-technical teams, because your salespeople, especially if you're a service like us, they should know when you're having outages so they can talk to customers, things like that. Also, we do recurring meetings. So once a month, we all get together and we review every postmortem that's happened that month. Again, because you want to share this information as broadly within your organizations as possible. So our postmortem template starts with, it's got 5 pieces. It starts with the first, which is a high-level summary. What happened at a high level? What was the impact on customers? How severe was the outage? Because we should be capturing information not only of our critical outages, but also of our minor ones as well, because we want to improve across the board. What components were affected, and then ultimately, at a summary level, what resolved the outage. If I jump into an example, this is a really basic one that happened last year. We had an actual severe outage, and as mentioned, include those images because, again, it's one thing for me to say that latency was high and there was increased 500 errors, but this graph from Pingdom of things just going through the roof, that says a whole nother story. But we want to capture that impact on customers because that ultimately is the important thing. We're all there to serve our businesses serve our customers. We need to keep focused on that. Part 2 of our template is how was this outage detected? Because we want to make sure that we're constantly improving, not that we're not having outages, because as mentioned, break things, right? We're always going to break things, but we want to get better at detecting these and better at identifying them and then working on the fixes. So we capture, did we have a metric that showed this outage? Because if we didn't, then we need better metrics. We need better dashboards, better alerting. Was there a monitor on that metric? Are we receiving those automated alerts for the important things? And then how long did it take for us to declare an outage? For this particular one, we had a ton of metrics, as we saw with that first dashboard from Pingdom. We had automated alerts on this, and for this one, it took us about 3 minutes. And again, I can't stress enough, take screenshots of your dashboards, or if you're using Datadog, use our notebooks feature to automatically include those. The third part of our template, how did we respond? So this is where we start to gather a lot of that human information. Who was the incident owner? Who took control of this? Who else was involved? We want to know everybody else that was involved on the team. But also, this is where we can start including who were the customers that maybe noticed this, that notified us. We want to link to our Slack archives, capture some of that dialogue. We want to capture what went well and what didn't go well. So again, this is ours jumping in. We have a list of the people. We have a link to our Slack archives and some of our other related information and a basic timeline of events. I can't stress enough that if you're using ChatOps, Slack, HipChat, any of those other tools out there, it's a fantastic way to gather this information. In fact, I would suggest that rather than doing a war room of everybody getting together in a meeting room and actually talking this out and working on it, jump into Slack. Because when you're talking, yeah, that's great. You get fast communication. But when you go to postmortem, do you remember everything that's said? Do you remember the order of how things were said? That becomes hard because, again, you lose a lot of that memory within 20 minutes. But if you have it in Slack, you can just point to that. So it makes it really easy to capture that and understand what information people had at very specific points in time. Another thing you can do is you can track learnings as you go. So you, again, don't do the postmortem, but just drop something in there. Hashtag it with postmortem. Search for those later, come back to it, gather up that information. The fourth part of our template is why did it happen? So this is where you do the deep dive. I've got a few links here for this particular outage. It's a really interesting thing on how VMs actually work. And then the fifth, the most important part of our template is how do you prevent this in the future? So we actually break this down into 3 sections. now, which is things that we have to actually implement right now, or this incident will actually reoccur or it'll get worse. Next is things that we plan for the following sprint, things that have to be done fairly soon, but that we can actually make cards for and start to plan for. And then later. Later is the section where, because you're working with other teams in your organization, there may be some extra planning involved. So you want to coordinate with them. So we put those in the later section. We start to work with other teams, get project managers involved to cross-pollinate and work on cards that are all part of the same issue. So again, jumping into ours, this is a quick one. Also note that you should keep notes so you can understand how things are going. So just to recap the 5 points, what happened at a high-level summary? How did we detect it? How did we respond? Why did it happen, the deep dive? And the most important, make those actionable steps. Link those to your Trello cards or your Jira tickets or whatever you're using to track. A few more resources. That's the link to the Postmortem template. So it's in a Google Doc. You can just clone that and start to use it on your own. The second link is to a small book written by my friend Jason Hand from VictorOps. It's a fantastic read. It's got a lot of great information on that. I don't think I have time for questions because we've gone over, and I'm getting angry looks. That's the link to the slides, though, so that's probably an easier thing to take a photo of. With that, questions out in the hall. Also, I have an extra large Datadog shirt and 2 pairs of Datadog socks for people that want them. So just meet me outside. Thanks.